Daughter expelled for wearing inappropriate clothes. What her mother said stunned the school. Welcome back and enjoy the story. Farah ran through the streets of Chicago, breathless, legs aching from the desperate sprint. Her hands still smelled of bleach from the cleaning job she had left early, without explanation or apology. Her worn apron was stained with the evidence of a morning's hard labor, her shoes too thin for the bitter Midwestern cold that bit through to her skin. But none of that mattered now. Nothing mattered except getting to Lincoln High School as quickly as possible. Her daughter had just been expelled. The call had come 30 minutes ago, interrupting Farah as she scrubbed the bathroom floor of a downtown office building. The school secretary's voice had been professionally detached, almost bored, as she delivered the news that would shatter Farah's carefully constructed world. For what? Farah had asked, stunned, her knees still pressed against the cold tile, yellow rubber gloves dripping with disinfectant. Her clothing is inappropriate. It disrupts the learning environment, they told her. The principal requires your immediate presence to collect Eriko and her belongings. Inappropriate. The word echoed in her skull like thunder as she ran, dodging pedestrians and ignoring the blaring horns of taxis when she darted across intersections against the light. Inappropriate. As if they knew anything about appropriateness, about necessity, about the way life carved itself into your bones when you were raising a child alone, in a city that didn't care if you survived. Farah reached the imposing brick facade of Lincoln High School, its manicured lawn and pristine windows suddenly appearing hostile rather than welcoming. She paused at the gate, chest heaving, noticing the clusters of people already gathered. Dozens of parents stood in small groups, watching her like she didn't belong, their designer coats and carefully arranged hair marking them as different from her in every possible way. Teachers stood on the periphery, whispering behind cupped hands. And there, sitting alone on the cold concrete steps, was her daughter Eriko, clutching her backpack to her chest like armor, trying desperately not to cry. 16 years old, honor student. The girl who stayed up late helping Farah with her English practice. The child who never complained when dinner was beans and rice again, who wore the same 3 outfits in careful rotation, who dreamed of becoming a doctor someday. Now sitting isolated, marked as different, as wrong, as inappropriate, Farah wanted to scream. She wanted to grab every one of these comfortable, judgmental people by their shoulders and shake sense into them. She wanted to tear down the school with her bare hands, brick by brick, until nothing remained of a system that could reject her brilliant, beautiful daughter. But instead, Farah stood still. She smoothed back the loose strands of hair that had escaped her hasty ponytail. She straightened her stained apron. She held her chin high, pulled back her shoulders, and walked forward through the parting crowd until she stood at the bottom of the steps, facing the principal and the assembled faculty. And then she spoke. "My daughter wears what I can afford," Farah said, her voice quiet but carrying across the sudden silence. "I stitched every seam with thread bought in coins saved from bus fare. These pants?" She gestured to Eriko's faded jeans with their careful patches at the knees. "They were mine 30 years ago when I first came to this country. These shoes, a donation from the church program. That sweater, I have mended it 4 times this winter alone. Not because I'm careless, but because I love her enough to make things last." She took a step forward, and the principal, a tall man in an expensive suit, unconsciously stepped back. "You say she's not dressed appropriately. What you mean is she doesn't look rich. You mean she doesn't fit your pictures of what students should be. You mean your walls weren't built for girls like mine, who know the value of things, who understand that character isn't sewn into designer labels." Farah's voice grew stronger with each word. "But let me tell you something. I'd rather raise a girl who wears clothes with holes than one whose heart has none." Silence fell over the schoolyard. Even the winter wind seemed to hold its breath. The principal stared, speechless. A teacher in the back dabbed at her eyes. Parents shifted uncomfortably, suddenly intensely interested in their expensive shoes. "She studies harder than anyone here," Farah continued, her voice breaking slightly. "She helps me work at night translating documents I can't read. And every morning she hugs me and says, 'Mama, one day I'll make things better for us.' She is more decent, more appropriate than any of you behind these polished doors who would judge her for circumstances she didn't choose." A teacher near the front was openly crying now. Parents began to lower their heads, unable to meet Farah's unwavering gaze. The silence stretched, broken only by the distant sound of traffic and the quiet sniffling of Eriku, who stared at her mother with a mixture of embarrassment and fierce pride. Finally, the principal cleared his throat and approached Farah, his earlier arrogance replaced by something that, if not quite shame, at least resembled discomfort. "Ms. Santos," he said, his voice trembling slightly, "perhaps we've been hasty in our assessment. I think we should discuss this matter further in my office." Farah looked past him to her daughter. "Eriko," she said softly, "come here." Eriko hurried down the steps and into her mother's arms, burying her face against the familiar scent of cleaning products and the faint perfume Farah saved for special occasions. "We'll talk," Farah agreed, holding her daughter close, "but not just about my Eriko. About every child who walks through those doors feeling less than because they don't have the right clothes or the right lunch or the right address. We'll talk about what education really means in this country, that promises so much and delivers so little to those who need it most." And as the crowd parted to let them pass, something had shifted in the air of Lincoln High School, something fundamental and irreversible. The walls that had seemed so imposing now appeared fragile, as if the truth of one cleaning woman's words had exposed cracks in their very foundation. That same afternoon, behind the closed door of the principal's office, apologies were offered, policies were reconsidered, and Eriko Santos, still wearing her patched jeans and mended sweater, was reinstated as a student of Lincoln High, with a promise that such an incident would never happen again. But Farah knew better than to trust promises. Change required more than words. It required action, vigilance, and the courage to stand up again and again until the world reshaped itself into something more just. As they walked home together through the gathering dusk of a Chicago winter evening, Eriku finally spoke. "Mama," she whispered, "I've never been so embarrassed or so proud." Farah squeezed her daughter's hand. "Sometimes, mi vida, that's exactly how change feels." If you're enjoying the story, type 5 in the comments and subscribe for more videos like this. If not, type 0. It helps me create even better content for you. Continuing, in the days that followed, Farah tried to return to normal, rising before dawn, preparing Eriko's lunch, catching the first bus to her morning cleaning job downtown. But something had changed. People looked at her differently on the bus. Some with respect, others with curiosity. At Eriko's school, teachers who had never noticed her before now greeted her by name. And most surprisingly of all, her phone kept ringing with calls from unfamiliar numbers. "Ms. Santos, this is Regina Wilson, from the Chicago Tribune. We'd like to interview you about what happened at Lincoln High." "Ms. Santos, I'm calling from Channel 8 News. We've heard about your stand against the school's dress code policies." "Ms. Santos, this is Councilwoman Parker. I was deeply moved by what I heard about your confrontation at Lincoln High School. I'd like to meet with you to discuss educational equity in our district." Farah ignored most of the calls. She had not spoken out for attention or recognition. She had spoken out because her daughter needed her. Nothing more. But when Councilwoman Parker's office called for the third time, Eriku convinced her to accept the meeting. "Mama, this could help other kids like me," she argued, her dark eyes serious behind her second-hand glasses. "What if you could change things for everyone?" The thought was overwhelming. Farah had spent most of her life trying to remain invisible, to work hard without complaint, to build a life for her daughter without drawing attention to their struggles. Speaking up at the school had been an anomaly, a moment of maternal ferocity. That had surprised even her. The idea of deliberately stepping into a spotlight made her stomach clench with anxiety. But Eriku's hopeful expression was impossible to resist. And so the following Thursday afternoon, Farah found herself sitting in the imposing downtown office of Councilwoman Helen Parker, still wearing her cleaning uniform because there had been no time to change between jobs. The councilwoman was younger than Farah had expected, with kind eyes that crinkled at the corners when she smiled. "Thank you for coming, Ms. Santos," she said, gesturing toward a comfortable chair. "I'm honored to meet you." Farah perched on the edge of the seat, her back straight, hands folded in her lap. "I don't understand why you wanted to see me," she admitted. "I'm just a mother who was protecting her child." "That's exactly why I wanted to meet you," Councilwoman Parker replied, leaning forward. "What you did, standing up to an entire educational system that was failing your daughter, that took extraordinary courage, and it highlighted a problem that affects thousands of children in Chicago schools." She pushed a folder across the desk. Inside were newspaper clippings, statistics, and photographs, all documenting disparities in disciplinary actions, educational outcomes, and resource allocation across Chicago's public schools. Dress code violations are disproportionately enforced against students from lower-income families and communities of color, the councilwoman explained. "It's one small part of a much larger problem. But your story has resonated with people in a way that statistics never could." Farah stared at the documents, feeling simultaneously validated and overwhelmed. "What does this have to do with me?" "I'm forming a parent advisory committee to work on educational equity reforms," Councilwoman Parker said. "We need voices like yours, people who understand these issues from lived experience, not just theory. Would you consider joining us?" Farah's immediate instinct was to refuse. She barely had time to breathe between her 3 jobs, let alone attend committee meetings. Her English, while functional, still embarrassed her in formal settings. What could she possibly contribute to policy discussions? But then she thought of Eriku sitting alone on those cold concrete steps, marked as unworthy because of clothing that simply reflected their economic reality. She thought of other children facing similar judgments, similar exclusions, without a parent who could afford to leave work and fight for them. "When would these meetings be?" she asked cautiously. Councilwoman Parker smiled. "We can work around your schedule, Ms. Santos. Your perspective is that valuable to us." 3 weeks later, Farah found herself addressing the Chicago Board of Education, her carefully prepared notes trembling in her hands. Behind her sat 6 other parents from the newly formed Equity Committee, each with their own stories of children marginalized by a system designed for those with more resources, more privilege, more knowledge of how to navigate educational bureaucracy. "My daughter was expelled for wearing clothes that were inappropriate," Farah began, her accent thicker than usual with nervousness. "But the truly inappropriate thing was a school system that judges children by their appearance rather than their character or their potential." As she spoke, she saw heads nodding in the audience. Not just the parents who had come to support her, but board members themselves. Educators who had perhaps never considered how their policies affected families struggling to survive. "We are not asking for special treatment," Farah concluded. "We are asking for fair treatment, for policies that recognize that dignity doesn't come from what you wear, but from how you are seen and valued. Our children deserve to be seen for who they truly are, not for what they can or cannot afford." The board voted unanimously that night to review all disciplinary policies with an equity lens, to provide resources for students in need of appropriate clothing, and to establish a permanent parent advisory group to ensure that family voices, particularly those often marginalized, would be included in future policy decisions. As they left the meeting, Gregorio Martinez, a father from the committee whose son had been repeatedly disciplined for wearing the wrong type of shoes, shook Farah's hand with tears in his eyes. "You have given us all a voice," he said simply. "Thank you." On the bus ride home, Eriku leaned her head on Farah's shoulder. "Did you ever think you'd be changing school policy for the whole city?" Farah laughed softly. "Never. I just wanted to make sure you could get your education without shame." "Well, you're kind of famous now, Mama." "Don't be ridiculous." But when they arrived home, their tiny apartment's answering machine was blinking with 7 new messages. And the next morning there was Farah's face on the front page of the local news section of the Tribune, under the headline, "Cleaning Woman's Courage Sparks Educational Reform." You know that saying, "Be careful what you wish for." By the end of the month, Farah was beginning to understand its meaning all too well. The spotlight that had found her was both opportunity and burden, opening doors she never knew existed, while simultaneously exposing her to scrutiny she had never anticipated. The story had gone beyond local news now. picked up by national outlets always hungry for inspirational content about underdogs fighting the system. Producers called, wanting to book her on morning shows. A children's rights organization asked her to speak at their annual fundraiser. A publisher suggested she might consider writing a memoir. "This is madness," Farah muttered in her native language, sorting through the business cards that now filled a shoebox on her kitchen counter. "All I did was tell the truth." But the truth, spoken plainly in a world of political spin and corporate doublespeak, had struck a chord. Parents across the country were sharing her story, using it to advocate for their own children. Teachers were examining their biases. Administrators were reviewing policies. And in the midst of this whirlwind, Farah still rose each morning at 4:30 a.m. to clean offices before the workday began. She still struggled to pay the rent on their one-bedroom apartment. She still carefully counted out coins for the laundromat and calculated whether they could afford fresh vegetables that week. "You could quit at least one of your jobs, Erikus," suggested one evening, watching her mother massage her swollen feet after a 12-hour day. "Some of these organizations are offering to pay you to speak." Farah shook her head firmly. "That money is not reliable. These people will forget about us as soon as the next story comes along. I won't risk our security for 15 minutes of fame." Eriku sighed but didn't argue. At 16, she understood the precariousness of their situation better than most adults. She had watched her mother build their life piece by piece after they'd arrived in America, with nothing but 2 suitcases and desperate hope. She knew how easily it could all collapse. What Eriko didn't fully understand, what kept Farah awake at night, was the cost of their new visibility. Immigration officials had taken notice of the woman suddenly appearing in news stories. Her oldest employer had expressed concern about the time she was taking off for meetings and interviews. And at school, while many students and teachers had rallied around Eriko, others resented the changes being implemented because of her mother's advocacy. "Freeloader," a boy had muttered in the hallway just yesterday, loud enough for Eriko to hear. "Getting special treatment because your mom played the victim card." Eriko hadn't told her mother about these incidents. Farah had enough to worry about, but the strain was showing in her daughter's tense shoulders, in the way she had grown quieter at dinner, in how often she now checked her phone with a furrowed brow. "Mama," Eriko said, now closing her textbook with unusual decisiveness. "Councilwoman Parker called me today." Farah looked up sharply. "Called you? Why would she call you and not me?" "Because she wanted to talk to me about something she thought you might say no to right away." Eriko took a deep breath. "She's helped arrange a full scholarship for me to attend Westridge Academy." Farah froze. Westridge Academy was one of Chicago's most prestigious private schools, where tuition cost more than she earned in a year. A scholarship? Why? "Because my grades are good enough," Eriko said, a flash of pride crossing her face before uncertainty returned. "And because, well, they're trying to diversify their student body. They want students from different backgrounds. They want to use you as their token poor student," Farah said flatly, "to make themselves feel better about their privilege." "Maybe," Eriko admitted, "but does that matter if it gets me into a school that sends 98% of its graduates to top universities? If it means I could become a doctor without spending the rest of my life paying off student loans." Farah was silent, torn by conflicting emotions. She had sacrificed everything to give Eriko opportunities. How could she object to this one? Simply because it felt like charity? Because it meant her daughter would enter a world Farah herself could never access? "There's something else," Eriko said quietly. "The scholarship includes housing in the school's dormitory. I would live on campus?" And there it was, the real source of Farah's sudden distress. Not just that Eriko would attend a different school, but that she would leave home. That, the tiny apartment that had been their safe harbor, would no longer shelter them both. "You want to leave?" Farah asked, hating the tremor in her voice. Eriko moved to kneel beside her mother's chair, taking Farah's work-roughened hands in her own. "I want what you've always taught me to want, a chance to build a better future. And," she hesitated, then continued with gentle honesty, "I think it might be safer for both of us if I'm not living here right now, with all this attention? It was the thing Farah had been trying not to think about, the increased scrutiny of their living situation, the questions about her immigration status, the subtle threats that had begun appearing in online comments sections beneath articles about her. When would this start, she asked, already knowing she would agree, already feeling the anticipated grief of separation. Next month, Eriku said, for the spring semester. So soon? They have an opening now because another student transferred out. Eriku squeezed her mother's hands. It's less than 5 miles away. I can come home on weekends, and you can finally have the bedroom instead of sleeping on the pull-out couch. Farah managed a watery smile. Always thinking of others, mi vida, even when making decisions for yourself. She pulled her daughter into a tight embrace. You should accept. This is why we came to America, so you could have chances I never had. 2 weeks later, Farah helped Eriko carry her few belongings into a dormitory room, smaller than their apartment, but still somehow luxurious with its freshly painted walls, new carpeting, and desk equipped with a computer. The school provides the laptops, explained the house mother, a kind-faced woman named Mrs. Bennett. All students have the same technology resources, regardless of their family situation. Eriko's roommate, Hannah, was a tall girl with freckles and an awkward smile, who seemed both curious about and intimidated by her new roommate's minor celebrity. I saw your mum on Good Morning America, she blurted out, then immediately blushed. Sorry, that was weird to say. Do you want help unpacking? As the girls arranged Eriku's clothes in the closet, the carefully mended sweaters and patched jeans looking conspicuously dated next to Hannah's casual designer outfits, Farah stood by the window, trying to commit every detail of this moment to memory. Her daughter, stepping into a world of opportunity. Her girl, surrounded by resources Farah had never been able to provide. Ms. Santos, Mrs. Bennett said quietly, touching Farah's elbow, we're honored to have Eriko joining us, and we're well aware that it's your courage that made this possible, not just for her, but for several other scholarship students who will be joining us next fall. Farah nodded, not trusting herself to speak. I want you to know that you're always welcome here, the house mother continued. We have parent apartments for visits, and we hope you'll join us for community dinners whenever your schedule allows. Thank you, Farah managed. You will take good care of her? We'll try, Mrs. Bennett smiled. Though I suspect Eriko is quite capable of taking care of herself and others, thanks to you. When it was finally time to leave, Farah found herself lingering, inventing reasons to stay a few minutes longer. One more hug, one more reminder about medication, one more question about weekend visits. Mama, Eriko finally said, gentle but firm. I'll be fine, and I'll see you on Saturday. Farah touched her daughter's cheek one last time. Saturday, she agreed, and then she made herself walk away, down the carpeted hallway lined with photographs of graduating classes dating back decades, out through the imposing oak doors with their polished brass handles, and into the crisp afternoon air of a world that suddenly felt both emptier and vastly larger than before. As she waited at the bus stop, a text message appeared on her phone. I love you, Mama. Thank you for everything. Farah closed her eyes against unexpected tears. This was what success felt like, she realized. This bittersweet ache of letting go, this pride entangled with loss. The bus arrived, hissing to a stop in front of her. As she climbed aboard, Farah caught a glimpse of her reflection in the vehicle's grimy side mirror, a small woman with tired eyes and graying hair, unremarkable in every way except for the fierce love that had driven her to change not just her daughter's life, but perhaps the lives of countless other children as well. You did good, she whispered to herself in her native language as the bus pulled away from the curb. You did good. You've probably been in a situation where you felt judged for something beyond your control. Have you ever stood up against unfair treatment, whether for yourself or for someone else? Share your experience in the comments below. The apartment felt cavernous without Eriko, spaces that had once seemed cramped, the kitchenette where they had cooked side by side, the small table where they had shared meals and homework sessions, the bathroom with its perpetually dripping faucet, now echoed with absence. For the first time in 16 years, Farah slept in the bedroom instead of on the pull-out couch, but she found the privacy more isolating than restful. In the sudden quiet of her evenings, Farah found herself with unfamiliar leisure time. Without Eriko's needs to attend to, without her daughter's constant companionship, there was a yawning emptiness that cleaning jobs and committee meetings couldn't fill. She tried watching television, but the cheerful families in sitcoms only highlighted her solitude. She tried reading, but the English words swam before her tired eyes. It was during this lonely period that Farah finally began returning some of the calls that had accumulated over the past month. Not the media requests, those she still regarded with suspicion, but the invitations to speak to parent groups, to meet with education advocates, to share her story with those who might benefit from hearing it. "I'm not a professional speaker," she warned Lucia Diaz, the organizer of a parent empowerment workshop at a community center in Pilsen. "My English is not perfect." "We don't need perfect," Lucia assured her. "We need real. We need someone who has walked in our shoes and found a way to make her voice heard." And so, on a Tuesday evening in early March, Farah found herself standing before a room of 30 parents, mostly mothers, mostly immigrants like herself, sharing not just what had happened at Lincoln High School, but the journey that had brought her to that moment of defiance. She told them about arriving in Chicago as a young woman, fleeing political violence with a 2-month-old baby and no support system. She described the years of working multiple jobs, learning English from television programs, navigating systems designed to exclude rather than assist. She spoke of the daily indignities of poverty, the constant fear of deportation, the exhaustion of always being one missed paycheck away from disaster. "I was silent for so long," Farah told them, her initial nervousness fading as she connected with the nodding heads and understanding eyes before her. "I thought that was the price of safety, to keep my head down, to never complain, to be grateful for whatever scraps fell from the table. But when they came for my daughter's dignity, something broke in me, or maybe something finally healed." After her talk, women lined up to speak with her, many with tears in their eyes. They shared their own stories of impossible choices, of children caught between cultures, of dreams deferred but not abandoned. "How do you find the courage?" asked a young mother balancing a toddler on her hip. "I'm so afraid of making things worse if I speak up." Farah considered the question seriously. "I didn't feel courageous," she admitted. "I felt desperate. But I've learned that sometimes those are the same thing. The moment when staying silent becomes more painful than the risk of speaking out." As the weeks passed, these speaking engagements became more frequent. Farah found herself traveling to community centers across Chicago's various neighborhoods, each with its own character and challenges, but all filled with parents who recognized their own struggles in her story. Meanwhile, the Parent Advisory Committee continued its work, transforming from an emergency response to Eriko's situation into a sustained effort to address systemic inequities. With Councilwoman Parker's support, they secured funding for a clothing closet program that would provide appropriate school attire to any student in need. They successfully lobbied for translation services at all school meetings and for all official communications. They began reviewing disciplinary data to identify and address patterns of bias. And through it all, Farah continued cleaning offices and apartment buildings, retrieving her uniform from the staff closet after attending board meetings in the same buildings where she emptied trash cans before dawn. The irony was not lost on her, how she moved between worlds, visible in one and invisible in the other. Eriko thrived at Westridge Academy. Her initial wariness gave way to cautious engagement as she discovered that her academic preparation at Lincoln had actually placed her ahead of many of her new classmates. Her perspective, shaped by immigration, by economic struggle, by watching her mother's advocacy, brought unique insights to classroom discussions. My European history. Teacher asked me to lead a discussion on migration patterns, she told Farah during one of their weekend visits, her eyes bright with excitement. And in biology, we're doing a unit on healthcare access that connects to social determinants of health. I have so much to contribute. Not everything was smooth, of course. There were still students who viewed Eriko as an interloper, who made Comments about scholarship cases when they thought she couldn't hear. Hannah, her roommate, had friends who pointedly did not extend their social invitations to include Eriku, and there was the constant, exhausting pressure of navigating unwritten social codes, which brands mattered, which slang was current, which cultural references separated insiders from outsiders. "Sometimes I feel like an anthropologist," Eriku confessed, curled up on the couch during a Sunday afternoon at home, studying a strange tribe with bizarre rituals. Farah laughed, threading her fingers through her daughter's hair. "And what have you learned about this tribe?" "That they're not as different as they seem," Eriku said thoughtfully. "They're insecure too. They worry about fitting in. They fight with their parents. They're afraid of the future." She paused. "But they've never been afraid of not having enough food, or of being evicted, or of someone calling immigration on their family. That's the difference." These conversations were precious to Farah, glimpses into her daughter's expanding world, proof that despite the new influences in Eriko's life, the values they shared remained intact. But they also highlighted the growing gap between their daily realities, a separation that sometimes left Farah feeling like she was being left behind. This feeling crystallized one Wednesday evening as Farah arrived home from work to find an unexpected package waiting outside her apartment door. Inside was a brand new laptop computer with a note from Eriku. "So we can video chat on the nights I can't come home. I saved up from the work-study job. Love you, Mama." Farah stared at the sleek machine, running her fingers over its smooth surface. The gift was undeniably thoughtful, undeniably practical for maintaining their connection, but it also represented a technological leap Farah wasn't sure she could navigate. More fundamentally, it symbolized how Eriku was moving forward into a world where such devices were necessities rather than luxuries, where digital fluency was assumed rather than exceptional. That night, as Farah struggled to follow the setup instructions written in technical English she barely understood, tears of frustration and something like grief slipped down her cheeks. Was this how it would be from now on? Her daughter racing, ahead into a future where Farah could only follow at a distance, always a step behind, always slightly lost. The next morning, determined to bridge this new divide, Farah took the laptop to the public library during her lunch break. A helpful librarian named David showed her how to create an email account, how to use the video chat program Eriko had mentioned, how to navigate the basics of internet searches. "You're a quick learner," David commented, as Farah successfully sent her first email, a brief message to Eriko expressing thanks for the gift. "I have to be," Farah replied simply. "My daughter needs me to keep up." That evening, they had their first video call. Seeing Eriko's face on the screen, bright, animated, framed by the dormitory room that was becoming her new home, Farah felt the distance between them simultaneously shrink and expand. Technology could connect them across the physical space, but it also highlighted how rapidly their lives were diverging. "I have a calculus test tomorrow," Eriko was saying, unaware of her mother's complicated emotions. "And then my biology study group is meeting to work on our research project. Oh, and Mrs. Bennett asked if you're coming to Parents' Weekend next month. They want you to participate in a panel discussion about educational equity." "Me?" Farah was startled. "Speaking at your fancy school?" "Yes, you!" Eriko laughed. "Mama, don't you realize you're becoming an expert on this stuff? Councilwoman Parker says legislators are starting to pay attention to your committee's recommendations." Farah shook her head, still uncomfortable with this framing of her accidental activism. "I just speak from experience, that's all." "That's exactly why people listen to you," Eriko insisted. "You're authentic. You don't use big academic words or quote theories. You talk about real life. That matters." After they said goodnight, Farah sat in the quiet apartment considering her daughter's words. Authentic, real. These were not qualities she had ever thought might be valuable in the public sphere. In her experience, power belonged to those with education, with money, with connections, not to cleaning women who spoke English with an accent. Yet something was undeniably shifting. People were listening to her. Changes were happening because she had dared to speak up. Perhaps the greatest gift she could give Eriko now was to embrace this unexpected role, to show her daughter that, no matter how life evolved, no matter what separations occurred or what new worlds opened up, courage remained the same. The simple, terrifying act of telling your truth, even when your voice shakes. The next day, Farah called Councilwoman Parker's office. "About that equity legislation you mentioned," she said when the councilwoman came on the line. "I have some ideas I'd like to discuss." April brought rainstorms that washed Chicago streets clean and filled the air with the promise of renewal. As daffodils pushed through the soil in Lincoln Park, new possibilities were also blooming in Farah's life, fragile, unexpected, but undeniably present. The Parent Advisory Committee's work had caught the attention of state legislators looking to address educational disparities. Councilwoman Parker had arranged a meeting with the Education Committee chair, and she wanted Farah to attend. "You don't need to prepare anything formal," the councilwoman assured her. "Just be ready to share your perspective on how dress codes and disciplinary policies affect low-income families." The meeting was scheduled for a Thursday afternoon, which meant Farah would need to miss her shift cleaning the downtown office building where she had worked for nearly a decade. When she nervously approached her supervisor to request the time off, she was prepared for resistance or even angry dismissal. Instead, Mr. Petrovich regarded her with an expression she couldn't quite interpret. "So," he said finally, "you have become important woman now, television interviews, meetings with politicians." Farah flushed. "It's not like that," she began, but he waved away her protest. "I watched you on Morning Show," he continued. "My wife," she cried, "said you reminded her of her mother when they first came from Ukraine. Nothing to eat but pride to spare." He nodded, as if confirming something to himself. "You take the time you need. Job will be here." Farah was momentarily speechless, unaccustomed to such accommodation from an employer who had previously denied her time off, even for Eriko's parent-teacher conferences. "Thank you," she said finally. "I will make up the hours on Saturday." Mr. Petrovich shook his head. "Paid time for advocacy work." When Farah tried to protest, he held up a hand. "Company has new policy. Community engagement hours for all employees. You are, what is word? Trailblazer." The irony wasn't lost on Farah that she, who had spent years trying to remain invisible while cleaning these offices, was now being held up as an example by the very corporation whose floors she scrubbed. But she accepted the unexpected gift of time with murmured thanks and a private wonder at how quickly the world could change its rules when it decided to see you. The meeting with state legislators took place in a conference room with views of Lake Michigan, its blue expanse glittering beneath the spring sunshine. Farah felt out of place amid the polished wood and leather chairs, beside education professors with advanced degrees and non-profit directors with decades of experience. But when Councilwoman Parker introduced her as the parent who sparked our entire initiative, the discomfort shifted into something like responsibility. "Ms. Santos, perhaps you could explain how the previous dress code policies affected your family economically," suggested Representative Wilson, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes and practical shoes. Farah straightened in her chair. "When you are working 3 jobs to keep your child fed and housed, every dollar matters," she began, her voice gaining strength as she spoke. "Her clothing violation notice meant choosing between sending my daughter to school in clothes that might get her sent home, or spending grocery money on new items we couldn't afford." She explained the impossible calculations poverty forced upon parents, the layaway plans for school supplies, the deliberate scheduling of doctor visits to avoid missing work, the constant dread of unexpected expenses. "For families like mine, there is no cushion," she concluded. "There is no emergency fund. There is only the daily choice between immediate needs and future hopes." The legislators asked thoughtful questions. They took notes. Most importantly, they listened, not with the performative attention of people checking a political box, but with the engaged focus of those genuinely seeking understanding. "What specific changes would make the most difference?" asked Representative Castillo, the committee chair. Farah shared the recommendations her parent committee had developed. subsidized uniforms for all schools that required them, flexible payment plans for field trips and extracurricular fees, elimination of disciplinary actions for poverty-related infractions, multilingual communications for all school policies, and parent representation on all policy-making bodies. "These aren't radical ideas," she said. "They're common sense if you believe that every child deserves access to education, regardless of their family's economic situation." "Implementation would be complex," noted Dr. Freeman, an education policy expert from the university. "The funding mechanisms alone, more complex than a 16-year-old girl trying to learn chemistry while wondering if today is the day she'll be humiliated for wearing the wrong clothes," Farah interrupted, surprising herself with her boldness. "More complex than a mother choosing between paying the electric bill and buying the calculator her daughter needs for math class." A silence fell over the room. Then Representative Wilson smiled. "Ms. Santos makes an excellent point about our priorities," she said. "Perhaps we should focus less on the complexity of solutions and more on the urgency of the problems." By the meeting's end, the committee had agreed to draft legislation, incorporating many of the parent advisory group's recommendations, with Farah invited to review the language before it was finalized. As they left the building, Councilwoman Parker squeezed Farah's arm. "You were magnificent in there," she said. "You cut through hours of policy speak with simple truth." Farah shook her head, still processing what had just occurred. "I only said what any parent in my situation would say if they had the chance." "Exactly," the councilwoman replied. "That's why we need to make sure more parents like you have a seat at the table." That evening, during their video call, Farah described the meeting to Eriko, whose face shone with pride. "Mama, do you realize what you're doing?" she asked. "You're changing systemic problems that have existed for generations." Farah laughed softly. "Don't exaggerate, mi vida. I'm just a cleaning woman who got tired of being invisible." "You're never going to see yourself the way others see you, are you?" Eriko shook her head fondly. "Oh, I forgot to tell you. I've been invited to join the Westridge Academy Student Diversity Council. They want me to help plan events that make the school more inclusive for scholarship students. Like mother, like daughter," Farah teased, "both of us becoming troublemakers." "We prefer the term change agents," Eriko corrected with mock seriousness, and they both dissolved into laughter that bridged the physical distance between them. Later, as Farah prepared for bed, she found herself pausing before the small mirror in the bathroom, studying her reflection with unusual attention. The face that looked back at her was one she had rarely considered beyond practical concerns. Was her hair neat enough for work? Did she look professional enough for Eriko's school meetings? But now she really looked, seeing the fine lines around her eyes that mapped years of worry and laughter, the set of her jaw that reflected determination, the quiet dignity that had sustained her through countless hardships. This was the face of a woman who had crossed borders and barriers of all kinds, who had built a life from nothing, who had found her voice when it mattered most. "Change agent," she whispered to her reflection, testing the unfamiliar title. Then she smiled and switched off the light. In May, as the school year approached its end, Farah received an unexpected call from Principal Lawrence, the same man who had stood stiffly on the steps of Lincoln High months earlier as she defended her daughter's right to an education. "Miss Santos," he began formally, "I'm calling to ask if you would consider delivering the keynote address at this year's graduation ceremony." Farah nearly dropped the phone. "Excuse me?" "Your advocacy has led to significant positive changes in our school and throughout the district," he continued. "Our graduating seniors have specifically requested that you speak about educational equity and the power of standing up for what's right." "But I don't have a degree or special qualifications," Farah protested. There was a pause before Principal Lawrence answered, his voice softer than she had ever heard it. "If I've learned anything from the past several months, Ms. Santos, it's that the most important qualification is the courage to speak truth, even when, especially when, those in power don't want to hear it." When Farah hesitated, he added, "You would be speaking not just to the students and their families, but to faculty and administrators from across the district. Your message could help ensure that what happened to Eriko never happens to another student." That was what finally persuaded her. "I will need help preparing something appropriate," she said. "My written English is not as good as my spoken English." "We have resources to assist you," Principal Lawrence assured her. "And Ms. Santos, thank you for making us better than we were." That same week brought another milestone. The State Education Committee had drafted its equity legislation, now named the Student Dignity Act, and scheduled public hearings. Farah was asked to testify, to put a human face on the statistics and policy language that filled the bill's pages. As she prepared, for both the graduation speech and the legislative testimony, Farah was struck by the strange turn her life had taken. She who had spent decades avoiding attention, minimizing her presence, staying beneath the radar of authority figures, was now deliberately stepping into spotlights of increasing wattage. "Are you nervous?" Gregorio Martinez asked as they waited. In the hallway outside the hearing room, both scheduled to speak about their experiences with inequitable school policies. "Terrified," Farah admitted, "but also I don't know the word in English. In my language we would say purposeful, like when you know you are doing exactly what you were meant to do, even if it's difficult." Gregorio nodded. "My grandmother would call it destiny, though she would probably add that destiny usually arrives disguised as trouble." Farah laughed. "Your grandmother sounds wise." When her name was called, Farah walked to the witness table with steady steps, adjusted the microphone and looked directly at the row of legislators. Her testimony was brief but powerful. No academic jargon, no political positioning, just the unvarnished reality of raising a child on the margins of a system designed for those with resources. "Every child deserves to learn without shame," she concluded. "Every parent deserves to be treated with dignity. This bill won't solve all the problems of inequality in our schools, but it recognizes that those problems exist and takes concrete steps to address them. I urge you to pass it, not just for my daughter, but for all the children whose parents cannot be here today because they are working multiple jobs, or afraid of authority, or simply unaware that their voices matter too." When the committee voted unanimously to advance the bill to the full legislature, the gallery erupted in applause. Councilwoman Parker, who had come to support Farah, pulled her into a warm embrace. "This is just the beginning," she whispered. "We're building momentum for much bigger changes." Farah nodded, allowing herself to feel the triumph of the moment, even as she recognized the truth of the councilwoman's words. This victory, significant as it was, represented just one small step toward the truly equitable education system their children deserved. As she left the hearing room, a young reporter approached her, digital recorder in hand. "Ms. Santos, there's talk that you might consider running for the school board next year. Any comment?" Farah stared at the woman, momentarily speechless. "That is not something I have considered," she managed finally. "You should," the reporter pressed. "You've already changed more policies from the outside than most board members do during their entire terms." The idea was so absurd that Farah nearly laughed aloud. Her, an immigrant with a heavily accented English, a woman who cleaned other people's offices for a living, a mother whose own formal education had ended before high school, on the school board? Impossible. And yet, as she rode the bus home that evening, the seed planted by the reporter's question took tentative root in her imagination. What if? What if she could represent families like hers in the rooms where decisions were made? What if her perspective could help shape policies before they were implemented, rather than forcing change only after harm had been done? Ridiculous, she muttered to herself as she unlocked her apartment door, and yet the thought lingered, a dangerous, tantalizing possibility that refused to be dismissed. That night, when Eriku called, Farah mentioned the reporter's question, expecting her daughter to share her incredulity. Instead, Eriku's face lit up with excitement. "Mama, that's brilliant. You absolutely should run." "Don't be silly," Farah protested. "I have no qualifications, no education, no money for a campaign." "You have something more important," Eriku countered. "You have moral authority, you have authenticity, you have a proven record of creating change." She leaned closer to the camera, her eyes intense. "And you have me. I would help you campaign, so would Councilwoman Parker, I bet, and all the parents you've been working with." "The election isn't for almost a year," Farah said, neither accepting nor rejecting the idea outright. We have plenty of time to think about such things. But that night, as she lay in the bedroom that still felt too empty without Eriku, Farah allowed herself to imagine it, standing before a microphone not as a supplicant or an accidental activist, but as a duly elected official with the power to ensure that education truly served all children, not just those born into privilege. The thought was terrifying. It was exhilarating. It was, perhaps, the next logical step in a journey that had begun on the concrete steps of Lincoln High School, when a cleaning woman had finally found her voice. The weekend before graduation, Eriku came home for an extended visit, bringing with her the news that she had been named a National Merit Scholar finalist. My counselor says I have a good chance at a full scholarship to several universities, she explained, her excitement tempered by caution. But we shouldn't count on anything yet. I am already counting, Farah said firmly, pulling her daughter into a fierce hug. I am counting on you to achieve everything you've worked for, and I am counting the blessings that brought us to this moment, even the difficult ones. Together they worked on Farah's graduation speech, Eriku helping to polish the wording while insisting that her mother maintain her distinctive voice and perspective. Don't try to sound like an academic or a politician, she advised. Your power is in your authenticity. There was that word again. Authenticity. As if the very qualities Farah had once tried to minimize, her accent, her background, her outsider status, were now her greatest strengths. It was a profound reversal, one she was still learning to embrace. The night before the ceremony, as they sat at their small kitchen table surrounded by index cards and drafts of the speech, Eriku suddenly set down her pen and looked at her mother, with an expression of such tenderness that Farah felt her breath catch. What is it, mi vida? I was just thinking, Eriku said softly, about all the times I was embarrassed by our situation when I was younger. How I wished we had a bigger apartment, or that you had a different job, or that we could afford the things other kids had. She reached across the table to take Farah's hand. I was so stupid. I didn't understand then what true wealth looks like. Farah squeezed her daughter's fingers. You were a child. Children want to fit in, to be like their friends. That's natural. Maybe, Eriku conceded, but I see it so clearly now. You gave me something far more valuable than material things. You showed me what courage looks like, what integrity means, how to stand up for what's right, even when you're scared. Her eyes shimmered with unshed tears. I am so proud to be your daughter. Farah felt her own eyes fill. And I am proud to be your mother. Always, always proud. The next day, beneath a cloudless June sky, Farah stood at the podium on the Lincoln High School football field, facing rows of graduating seniors in their caps and gowns, surrounded by families, faculty, and district officials. Her hands trembled slightly on the note cards, but her voice was clear and strong as she began to speak. 1 year ago, I stood on the steps of this school fighting for my daughter's right to an education, she said. Today, I stand before you, not just as Eriko's mother, but as someone who has learned that education is not a privilege to be granted or withheld based on appearance or economic status. It is a fundamental right that belongs to every child. As she spoke about dignity, about resilience, about the courage to challenge unjust systems, Farah saw faces in the crowd transform, students sitting straighter, parents nodding in recognition, teachers exchanging thoughtful glances. You graduates are entering a world that will try to define you by what you own, what you wear, where you live, she continued. But I hope you have learned during your time at Lincoln that true value lies in who you are, in your character, in your compassion, in your willingness to stand up for others, even when it's difficult. She gestured toward the school building, behind her. This institution is stronger today because it was willing to listen, to change, to grow. That is the most important lesson any of us can learn, that acknowledging our mistakes and working to correct them is not weakness. It is the highest form of strength. As Farah concluded her speech, the audience rose in a standing ovation that seemed to lift her off the ground, carrying her on a wave of connection and shared purpose. In that moment, surrounded by the community that had once seemed so hostile, but now embraced her message, Farah felt a certainty crystallize within her. This was not an endpoint, but a beginning. In the months that followed, as Eriku began her senior year at Westridge Academy and the Student Dignity Act moved toward final passage in the state legislature, Farah continued her dual existence, cleaning woman by day, advocate by night. But, increasingly, the boundaries between these roles blurred as her advocacy work gained recognition and her voice carried further. Mr. Petrovich arranged for her to work day shifts only, freeing her evenings for meetings and speaking engagements. The Parent Advisory Committee expanded its focus beyond dress codes to address broader issues of educational access. And yes, despite her initial resistance, Farah began seriously exploring the possibility of running for the school board in the spring election. "You need a campaign manager," Councilwoman Parker told her over coffee one afternoon in September. "Someone who understands both education policy and grassroots organizing." "I need to be sure this is the right path first," Farah replied cautiously. "I don't want to lose focus on the work we're already doing." "Running for office would amplify that work," the councilwoman pointed out. "Think about how much more you could accomplish with an actual vote on policies." Before Farah could respond, her phone buzzed with a text message from Eriko. "Got the scholarship! Full ride to Stanford!" Farah gasped, showing the screen to the councilwoman, who let out a whoop of delight that turned heads throughout the cafe. "That's it," Councilwoman Parker declared, reaching across the table to grasp Farah's hand. "That's your sign. Your daughter is soaring because you had the courage to break down barriers. Now you can do the same for countless other children." And in that moment of shared joy, with her daughter's future suddenly secure and limitless, Farah felt the last of her hesitation dissolve. Yes, she would run for the school board. Yes, she would continue speaking truth to power. Yes, she would use every opportunity, every platform, every open door to ensure that education fulfilled its promise for all children, not just the privileged few. "Okay," she said simply. "Let's do it." You won't believe what happens next. Will Farah win the school board election? How will Eriko's college journey unfold? Stay tuned to find out in our next installment. One crisp October morning, as crimson leaves swirled across Chicago sidewalks and students settled into the rhythm of a new school year, Farah met with her newly formed campaign committee in the community room of the local library. Around the ETUATA's table sat an unlikely coalition: parents from her advocacy group, teachers who had been moved by her graduation speech, community organizers impressed by her effectiveness, and Eriku, home for the weekend and practically vibrating with excitement. "We need to establish our campaign platform," said Michael Chen, a retired school administrator who had volunteered to help structure Farah's run for office. "What are the key issues you want to focus on?" Farah looked around the table, still, somewhat bewildered to find herself at its center. 6 months ago, she would have been cleaning this room, emptying trash cans while meetings like this one carried on without noticing her presence. Now people were taking notes on her words, deferring to her experience, looking to her for direction. "Educational equity, obviously," she began. "But more specifically, I want to focus on 3 areas: transparency and policy-making, with all decisions explained in plain language and multiple languages; economic accessibility, ensuring that no child is excluded from opportunities because of family finances; and cultural dignity, creating environments where diversity is genuinely valued rather than merely tolerated." "That last point is crucial," added Natasha Williams, a Lincoln High English teacher who had become one of Farah's strongest allies within the school system. "So many equity initiatives focus exclusively on racial diversity without addressing class differences or immigrant experiences." They spent the morning developing messaging, planning outreach strategies, and building a timeline for the campaign that would officially launch after the new year. Farah listened, contributed, asked questions, but a part of her remained detached, observing this strange new reality from a distance, as if she might wake at any moment to find herself back in her previous life, invisible and voiceless. At lunch, while others chatted about fundraising possibilities, Eriko pulled her mother aside. "You're doing that thing again," she said softly. "What thing?" That thing where you're physically present, but mentally preparing for all of this. To disappear. Eriko's perceptiveness was both comforting and disconcerting. Mama, this is real. You've earned this. You belong here. Farah sighed. It still feels unlikely, like a story someone is telling about someone else's life. Well, get used to it, Eriko grinned, because it's only going to get more unlikely. Did you see the email I forwarded you? Stanford wants to profile you. In their alumni magazine when I start next fall, first-generation students' mother changes education policy. They're calling you a transformative voice in educational equity. Farah shook her head, equal parts embarrassed and proud. Just don't let all this distract you from your studies. Your future is already brighter than we ever imagined, Eriko interrupted gently. And so is yours. It's okay to embrace that. You know, it's okay to want things for yourself now, not just for me. The wisdom in her daughter's words lingered with Farah throughout the afternoon meeting, through the strategy sessions and volunteer sign-ups and tentative campaign slogan proposals. Was it truly possible to want things for herself? To see a future defined not by survival and sacrifice, but by purpose and possibility? As the meeting concluded and committee members dispersed with assignments and action items, Farah remained seated at the table, absently gathering scattered papers and paper coffee cups. Natasha Williams lingered as well, helping with the cleanup. You know, the teacher said conversationally, I've been at Lincoln High for 15 years. I've seen school board members come and go. Most of them mean well, but they have no idea what actually happens in classrooms. Farah nodded, uncertain where this observation was leading. You're different, Natasha continued. You see the whole ecosystem, from the kids who come to school hungry, to the teachers trying to help them, to the administrators caught between conflicting priorities. You understand how policies actually play out in real lives. She paused, making sure she had Farah's full attention. That's rare, and it's exactly what our district needs. Something shifted in Farah's chest, a subtle realignment, like a door long stuck finally swinging open. Perhaps Eriko was right. Perhaps this new chapter wasn't a temporary deviation, but the natural evolution of her life's journey. Perhaps she did belong here, in this unfamiliar territory of influence and agency. Thank you, she said simply. I will try to be worthy of that trust. As October yielded to November, the Student Dignity Act finally came up for a vote in the U state legislature. Farah sat in the gallery, flanked by Councilwoman Parker and Gregorio Martinez, watching as representatives debated the bill that had grown from her single act of defiance on the steps of Lincoln High. The financial implications cannot be dismissed, argued one legislator, a middle-aged man representing a wealthy suburban district. Subsidizing uniforms, waiving fees, where does the money come from? Where did the money come from for the new football stadium in your district? Countered Representative Castillo, the bill's sponsor. We find funding for what we value. This bill asks us to value all students equally, regardless of their economic circumstances. When the final vote tally appeared on the electronic board, 76 in favor, 23 opposed, Farah felt tears spring to her eyes. The gallery erupted in applause as Representative Castillo looked up and nodded directly at her, acknowledging the journey they had taken together from that first committee hearing to this moment of legislative victory. Outside the Capitol building, as supporters celebrated, a reporter approached Farah with a microphone. Ms. Santos, now that the Student Dignity Act has passed, what's next for your advocacy work? Before she could respond with her usual deflection, Farah heard Eriko's words echoing in her mind. It's okay to want things for yourself now. It's okay to embrace the unlikely reality unfolding before you. I'm exploring a run for the district. 5 school board seat, she said clearly, the words emerging with surprising confidence. Because policies need champions at every level of governance, and because families like mine deserve direct representation in decision-making processes. The reporter's eyebrows rose. That's breaking news, Ms. Santos. Can we get more details? On your platform. And there on the steps of the state capitol building, Farah gave her first impromptu campaign speech, articulating her vision for schools that truly served all students, regardless of background or circumstance. As a small crowd gathered to listen, She felt that same sense of purpose that had filled her on the steps of Lincoln High, that same certainty that she was speaking truth that needed to be heard. When she finished, Councilwoman Parker squeezed her arm. "Well, I guess your campaign just officially launched," she said with a grin. "A bit ahead of schedule, but sometimes the moment chooses you." Later that evening, Farah called Eriko to share the news of both the legislative victory and her unexpected campaign announcement. "I saw it already," Eriko exclaimed. "You're trending on social media, Mama. The video of your impromptu platform speech has over 50,000 views." "What? How is that possible?" "Because you're authentic," Eriko said simply. "In a world of polished politicians saying nothing of substance, you speak from lived experience and genuine conviction. People are hungry for that." As November deepened toward winter, Farah's campaign took shape with surprising momentum. A local graphic design firm offered pro bono services to create materials. Small donations began arriving through the website. Eriko had built with help from her tech-savvy classmates. Community groups and teacher organizations expressed early support. Most significantly, parents began reaching out. Immigrant parents, working-class parents, single parents, parents of children with disabilities, all seeing in Farah's candidacy the possibility of representation they had never before experienced. "My son has ADHD," one mother told Farah during a community forum. "The school treats him like he's deliberately disruptive, but we can't afford private testing or therapy. Would you address special education access in your platform?" "My daughters wear hijab," shared another parent. "They face comments and even disciplinary actions that their friends never experience. Would your cultural dignity policies protect religious expression?" Each conversation expanded Farah's understanding of what true educational equity would require, not just dress code reforms or fee waivers, but a fundamental reimagining of how schools identified and addressed barriers to learning. Her platform evolved accordingly, becoming more comprehensive with each listening session, each new perspective incorporated. December brought Eriko home for winter break, her last as a high school student. As they decorated their small apartment, for the holidays, the same artificial tree they had used for 12 years, the same handmade ornaments Eriko had crafted in elementary school, Farah was struck by the parallel journeys they were both undertaking. "Next year at this time you'll be finishing your first semester at Stanford," she marveled, "and I might be preparing for my first school board meeting." "Might be?" Eriko raised an eyebrow. "You're going to win, Mama. The polls already show. You leading, and the election is still months away." It was true, a local newspaper's survey had shown Farah with a surprising lead over the incumbent board member, whose defensive response to the Student Dignity Act, unfunded mandates that burden local districts, had alienated many constituents. "Nothing is certain in politics," Farah cautioned, "and I won't compromise what I believe just to win votes." "That's exactly why you're going to win," Eriko insisted. "People are tired of politicians who say whatever will get them elected, then serve special interests once in office. You're the real deal." The real deal. Authentic, transformative voice. The descriptions people applied to her still felt foreign to Farah, who had spent most of her life trying to avoid attention rather than seek it. But as the new year dawned and her campaign officially launched with a rally at the community center, where she had first begun speaking to parent groups, even Farah had to acknowledge that something extraordinary was unfolding. 200 people packed the room that snowy January evening. Teachers stood alongside janitors. Principals conversed with parents. Students, including a delegation from Westridge Academy that Hannah had helped organize, held homemade signs, "Dignity for all students," and "Santos for school board," and, most touchingly, "From cleaning woman to changemaker." When Farah approached the microphone, the crowd fell silent, expectant. She looked out at the diverse faces before her, at Eriko beaming from the front row, at Councilwoman Parker giving an encouraging nod, at Mr. Petrovich standing somewhat uncomfortably in his good suit by the door. "1 year ago," Farah began, echoing the opening of her graduation speech, "I was invisible to most of you. I cleaned your offices. I emptied your trash cans. I scrubbed your floors after hours while you were home with your families. And that was okay. It was honest work that helped me raise my daughter, who will attend Stanford University next fall. On a full scholarship. A cheer went up from the crowd, especially loud from the student section. But something happened that forced me out of invisibility, Farah continued. My daughter was expelled for wearing clothes that were deemed inappropriate. Clothes that simply reflected our economic reality, not any lack of respect for education. And in that moment I had a choice: remain invisible or speak up. She paused, remembering the fear and fury of that day on the school steps, the trembling in her legs, even as her voice grew stronger with each word. I chose to speak up. Not because I wanted attention or power, but because silence would have betrayed everything I had taught my daughter about dignity and justice. Farah's voice grew more passionate. And what I discovered was that my voice mattered, that my experience mattered, that the perspective of a cleaning woman, an immigrant, a single mother had value in discussions about educational policy. She gestured to encompass the room. Look at what we have accomplished together in just 1 year. A statewide law protecting students from economic discrimination. A transformation in how Lincoln High approaches diversity and inclusion. A scholarship program that has already helped 5 students from our community attend colleges they could not otherwise afford. The crowd applauded, many nodding in recognition of the tangible changes they had witnessed. But our work is just beginning, Farah said, her voice quieting so that people leaned forward to listen. True educational equity requires more than a single law or policy change. It requires ongoing vigilance, sustained commitment, and diverse voices at the decision-making table. That is why I'm running for school board, not to advance a personal agenda, but to ensure that the perspectives of families like mine are represented when decisions are made that affect our children's futures. As Farah outlined her platform, specific, practical proposals informed by countless conversations with parents, teachers, and students, she felt something shift in the room. The initial curiosity and goodwill was transforming into something more substantial. Collective purpose, shared vision, the recognition that her individual journey had become part of a larger movement for educational justice. When she concluded her speech and the room erupted in applause, Farah finally allowed herself to fully inhabit this new reality, not as an improbable detour from her real life, but as the natural fruition of everything she had experienced, everything she had learned, everything she had overcome. This was her life now, not just Eriko's mother, not just a cleaning woman, but a leader, a voice, a change agent whose personal struggle had illuminated systemic injustice and catalyzed collective action. As the campaign launch transitioned into a community celebration with music and refreshments, Farah found herself surrounded by well-wishers, offering support and sharing stories. In one quiet moment, she stepped aside to catch her breath and found Eriko watching her with shining eyes. "So," her daughter said softly, "still feel like this is happening to someone else?" Farah smiled and shook her head. "No, this is happening. To us, to all of us who have felt invisible, who have been told we don't belong, who have been judged for our clothes or our accents or our addresses rather than our character or our contributions." Eriko nodded, taking her mother's hand. "From now on, when a girl like me walks into a school, they won't see inappropriate. They'll see potential. That," Farah said, squeezing her daughter's fingers, "is worth every struggle, every sacrifice, every moment of fear I've ever experienced." And as they rejoined the celebration, surrounded by a community united in purpose, Farah knew with unshakable certainty that this was only the beginning of their journey. For both mother and daughter, the path ahead would hold challenges and triumphs neither could yet imagine. But they would walk that path with heads held high, no longer invisible, no longer silenced, no longer deemed inappropriate. They would walk with dignity, with purpose, with the knowledge that their voices mattered. And they would hold the door open for others to follow. Congratulations, type 9 in the comments so that I know you stayed until the end with me. Thank you for watching, and until tomorrow's story on this same channel.